and welcome back to my channel. Sorry I don't really have a super dramatic entrance, but I thought maybe the change of scenery would be good enough to make up for that. I finally fixed my tripod, so, well, I don't know if I actually fixed it, I just it's balanced enough that I can use it instead of setting my camera on my dresser like I usually do. So I decided that you get to have the view of my favorite wall again. You're welcome. So, in my last video, where Natasha controlled my life, she told me to write a short story and read it on camera. If I didn't do it then, I had to make a storytime video on it, so that is what I'm doing today. Now my problem is I am bad at writing short stories, so this is going to be at least 2 parts. I don't know, we'll find out. Yeah, here you go, this is my story. I was supposed to include a mango, a chinchilla, a cottage, and a fly swat. So, this is the story that I wrote off of these. How I write stories is I just start writing and I don't have a plot. I don't know where I'm going. I write very just sit down and just write whatever comes out. And I never rewrite or edit or anything, which is probably bad. So yes, I shall read you my story. It does not have a name yet. We can decide later what we're gonna name it. Okay. Once upon a time, there was a prince named Algamond. His good father, the king, was named John the 117th. Who had boldly decided at his son's birth that it was time to introduce a new name into the dynasty, because the family reunions, not to mention history books, were getting far too confusing. Now, Algamond was just of the age to be married off, which is convenient because otherwise we wouldn't bother with him and we'd have to find a new main character, because this is a romance and it's going to end in happily ever after, whether Algamond likes it or not. You may be wondering, what is this magical age at which people are ready to be married, no sooner and no later? Asking for a friend. In response, I would tell you to mind your own business and listen to the story and stop interrupting and asking for unnecessary amounts of detail. Algamond had lived a happy life up until this point with his 2 best friends, Chico and Nogor-the-Oki-Ta-Ta-Tolumpus, whom we shall call Dragon for short, because it makes sense, seeing as how Nogor-the-Oki-Ta-Ta-Tolumpus is a dragon. You may be wondering, well, what sort of person is Chico? In response, I would have to say that Chico is clearly a chinchilla and ask you to please stop asking stupid questions. One innocent-looking day, Algamond was breakfasting with his family when his father said, "Algamond, you're going to get married in 2 weeks." This did not affect Algamond the way it might have affected you if your father had said this to you out of the blue like that. He simply shrugged, finished chewing his bite of food, swallowed, and then asked, "To whom?" "To Princess Piplia," said his father, and that was the end of the conversation. That afternoon there was a knock on Algamond's door. "Come in," he called, looking up from rolling around on the floor with Dragon, teasing him with a mango. You might ask, why a mango? To which I would have to reply, because they are Dragon's favorite food, in fact the only food which he will eat, and would you please stop interrupting? The door opened, and there stood a girl about Algamond's age, looking very grumpy. "I'm Princess Piplia," she announced, but that introduction was unnecessary because we all already assumed who it was. Obviously, I'm not going to introduce random unimportant girls to this story and waste time, because this is supposed to be a short story. Although it won't be if you keep interrupting. Anyway, Prince Algamond replied, "I'm Prince Algamond," because that was the truth and he had no reason to lie. "You must be my future wife. Pleased to make your acquaintance." And he rose politely and gave a perfectly executed bow, because when you're a prince they teach you how to do those kinds of things. Now, this did not affect Algamond the way it might have affected you if your future spouse had unexpectedly showed up outside your door. He only took it as a matter of course and wasn't the slightest bit ruffled. He had a very mild temperament, you understand, and was rarely unbalanced by such trivial happenings. "I am not particularly pleased to make yours," Piplia replied sweetly, with a gorgeous curtsy to follow this statement of fact. "Why not?" asked Algamond. Now he was surprised. It never occurred to him that there might be any bumps along the way between meeting his intended and happily ever after. You may ask as well, why not? But that just goes to show that you've never been a prince in a fairy tale before, and I would have to kindly ask you to stop showing your ignorance and listen to the story. "Because I don't like you," Piplia said, smiling most beautifully. She was really quite pretty when she truly smiled. But Algamond had no way of knowing this, because this particular type of smile made her resemble a shark. "Why not?" Algamond asked again, further surprised by this revelation. "You've never met me before." "No, I haven't," Piplia agreed. "But truly, first impressions are everything after all, wouldn't you agree?" And she flounced away. Algamond's complacency was ruffled after that encounter, which bothered him because nothing had ever managed to surprise him before, and this was a new experience. And not an altogether agreeable one at that. In fact, it was a most altogether disagreeable experience, which discovery only served to further ruffle his inner calm and made everything even worse. Dragon, sensing his master's present state of confusion, sidled over and began wrapping himself around and around Algamond's legs, as a cat might do, bringing warmth and comfort. Dragon is a miniature dragon, in case you needed clarification on that point. Chico watched sagely from the side of the room, because he was a chinchilla, and chinchillas don't talk. Algamont eventually gave in to Dragon's mute coaxing, and went back to playing with him on the floor, which greatly improved his mood and made him decide that all was right with the world again, and things would take a speedy turn towards happily ever after. For he was a prince, after all, destined to marry a princess, and by right of their heritage it would all turn out perfectly. Chico, meanwhile, wandered down the royal hallways, moving in that adorable fashion only other chinchillas can perfectly imitate. He made his way to Piplia's quarters and scooted himself inside. You may ask, how did he know where she was staying? To which I would reply that chinchillas have a sixth sense for finding people, and also Chico was a smart creature and perfectly capable of using inductive reasoning powers to figure out where they would have lodged the princess, and you really are very determined to slow down this story, aren't you? As I said, Chico scooted himself into the princess's room to find her busily unpacking and muttering to herself. She glanced over at him, surprised, pausing momentarily to stare at him. Then she resumed her work with a forlorn, "Oh, you." Chico, being a chinchilla, made no verbal response. Instead, he blinked twice. "Nothing personal, you know," Piplia continued. Well, you know what? I'm jealous." Chico scurried forward a bit. "That prince, what's his name? He's got it made. It's not fair. I could see it in his eyes right away. He's too happy. Don't give me that look. He really is. He's perfectly content with life, placid, hopeful. He's got no sense of anything ever not turning out perfectly. And you know why? Because for him it hasn't. No one could have that look of utter peace and contentment if life had ever gone any way but the way they expected and desired." Chico may have been very impressed with her intuitive powers, but if he was, he didn't say so. Being a chinchilla, he wasn't able to talk. Thus, Piplia continued uninterrupted. "And so I'm jealous. It's not fair and I don't like it. He's probably had everything his way from the moment he was born. He apparently doesn't even mind a random girl getting dropped in his lap and being told to marry her. It's infuriating. He's far too easygoing." The speed of all her movements was steadily increasing, along with the volume of her voice, as she went back and forth between her suitcase and the wardrobe, yanking out dresses and hanging them up again. "Now, do you think I mind being dropped in a random prince's lap and being told to marry him?" Chico offered no reply. "No one ever even thought to ask me," Piplia complained. Chico, being a chinchilla and thus unable to talk, didn't ask either. "But of course, when you're of an age to marry, that's that, and marry you must, like it or not, to whoever they pick out for you. And you know what, animal? I don't like it." If Chico resented being referred to as animal, he didn't say anything. As previously stated, he was a very smart creature and realized humbly that most people don't know what chinchillas are, and realized humbly that most people didn't know what chinchillas were, and thus Piplia couldn't be faulted. He knew she wasn't trying to be rude. She just hadn't been properly introduced to him to know his species and or name. If anything, this was a sad failing on Algamont's part, so he merely blinked at her again. Somehow that comforted Piplia a bit. Chico, being a chinchilla, was able to convey compassion without having to use words or facial expressions, and Piplia, being an intuitive sort of person, easily picked up on this. She stopped her restless movements and plopped down cross-legged on the floor, a dress still clutched in her hands. She twisted the fabric idly as she stared at the pattern on the carpet as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. Chico was a chinchilla, and they are very patient creatures, so he waited comfortably, giving her the space she needed. At last, Piplia continued, "He has everything. Life never bothered him at all. And what's more, and I think this is what really makes me jealous, he has a dragon. It's so unfair. To top it all off, he gets a dragon. A dragon, do you hear me?" Chico twitched his nose a few times. "I know," Piplia agreed. "I was never allowed to have any pets at all, and I always wanted one, particularly something interesting. But what I call interesting, my parents call dangerous." Chico slowly moved forward and hopped into her lap. She absent-mindedly began to pet him, running her hand down his head all the way to the tip of his beautiful tail, over and over again. It was very calming and therapeutic, this slow, repeated motion, as Chico knew it would be. He was a chinchilla, after all, and they're very smart. So Piplia was in a much better frame of mind in a few minutes, after getting to voice her complaints to a willing listener and having had Chico use all his chinchilla charms upon her. She was so much herself again that she came up with a plan. "I'll run away," she announced happily. She was truly smiling now, so she looked very pretty, though only Chico was there to appreciate it. "My parents aren't here watching my every move anymore, and Algamon won't care even if I make it and it's discovered that I'm missing. I'll go live in a cottage in the woods and adopt at least 112 pets. Princesses always do well with animals anyway, don't they? Chico wiggled his ears sagely. That would really be the life, Piplia sighed dreamily. Forget boys and ball gowns. I'm ready for a change. When would be the best chance to sneak out? Chico blinked. You're right, I should wait a while. Put them off their guard. She stood up, dumping Chico off her lap in her excitement. He landed buried under the dress and had to burrow his way out. Once in the open again, he saw Piplia still standing there, bouncing on her heels, clenching and unclenching her hands, and looking a little lost. Chico knew that she needed something to do with her excited energy now, but her first thought, which had been to direct that towards finishing unpacking, was followed by another one, which was that it was useless to unpack if she was about to run away. You may ask, how could Chico possibly know that? He can't read minds. To which I would have to reply that I have told you many, many times that chinchillas are very smart creatures, and what would you know? Have you ever been a chinchilla? Maybe they can read minds. Stop interrupting. Chico, you will kindly remember, was a chinchilla, and chinchillas are very smart creatures. So he turned up his inner adorableness to maximum capacity and started scurrying in circles around Piplia until he suddenly bounded away and paused in the doorway, turning to look back at her, his whiskers twitching and his eyes shining very black and beautiful. How could any girl resist eyes like those? Piplia laughed and gave chase. For the next 20 minutes, Piplia enjoyed a very lively game of catch the unknown species of animal all around the palace. For those same 20 minutes, Chico enjoyed a very lively game of distract the princess and subtly lead her where you want her to go while simultaneously helping her get in her exercise. Chinchillas are very thoughtful creatures and are good at multitasking. So it was that they ended up in Algamond's room again. Now Algamond, as Chico knew, was gone on his mid-morning ride, which he took every day for his own form of exercise. Chico also knew, unlike the people of the time, that riding a horse was mostly only good for exercising the horse and not you, so he made sure that Algamond also took up such sports as sword fighting, tussling with dragon, and playing a game that Chico had invented, though Algamond thought he himself had, and which the prince, being the member of the trio gifted with speech, creatively named a mixture of tag and hide-and-seek and dodgeball with a bit of banister sliding and breaking things mixed in. It was a bit of a mouthful, but Algamond never seemed to mind. Chico had his own shorter name that he privately used, but, being a chinchilla, he was unable to share it with anyone. You may comment, that was a long side note and I've forgotten what was actually happening. Can we get back to the story now? To which I would reply, would you please stop interrupting and let us get back to the story now? As I was saying, Algamond was off on his daily ride, so it was just Dragon in the room, asleep in front of the window in an enormous pool of warm, golden sunlight. Piplia squealed in delight when she saw him and raced over to him, her voice an octave higher as she exclaimed, "Aw, he's so adorable!" Dragon, already being sensitive about his size, did not particularly appreciate this added insult to his ferocity, and woke up with a snarl. A few sparks of fire shot from his mouth, but this only added to Piplia's delight as she dropped to her knees beside him and began to cuddle him. Dragon continued to snarl menacingly to convey his displeasure, wriggling in her grasp to get away. "Oh, look, animal, he's purring! So cute!" Piplia cried, getting more excited by the moment. "He likes me!" Dragon gave a howl of protest at this, but just then he saw Chico sitting primly to the side. The black eyes snapped with a command, and Dragon stilled himself and submitted to the princess's fondling, though he continued to grumble to himself in the back of his throat. Chico, maintaining eye contact, flicked his tail imperiously. Dragon's head jerked back, and he spat a few more sparks. Chico twitched his whiskers. Dragon lashed his own tail and began snarling again. Chico blinked slowly 4 times. Dragon hissed, and all the spines along his back stiffened. Chico blinked 4 more times, even more slowly. Dragon growled, but less enthusiastically this time. Chico tilted his head to the side. Dragon gave him a withering scowl, then turned to Piplia, and begrudgingly slid his tongue all the way up her arm. She laughed. "It tickles!" She was not at all offended by the dragon slobber on her skin. She found it utterly adorable. Dragon could do no wrong in her eyes. Chico walked over to the pair, where Dragon was still, under protest, offering his affections to the princess. Chico nosed Piplia, who glanced at him, and then he stared wisely up at the ceiling. Piplia, curious, followed his gaze to see a large birdcage stuffed with mangoes, hanging at just the right height for her to reach. "Oh, dragon treat!" she exclaimed, thinking she was very clever. Chico, as you will remember, was truly the clever one, but he liked to make people feel better about themselves and believe that all their good ideas came from their own heads. He was a chinchilla, and chinchillas are very humble creatures after all. Piplia dumped Dragon out of her lap and retrieved a mango, which she then fed to him. Dragon gave Chico a sidelong glance that conveyed a grudging thanks. Then he sighed a very hot sigh of resignation. Chico wriggled his nose. You may ask, Why does Agumon keep Dragon's mangoes in a birdcage? To this, I would have to reply that it's so that Dragon doesn't get into them and eat them all in one go and make himself sick. You may ask also, how does that stop him? Can't dragons fly? And surely a dragon as clever as Dragon could find a way to undo the latch or stick his snout through the bars and eat them. They're not spaced that close together after all. To which I would have to reply that I never said Dragon was clever, only that Chico was. Dragon is clever, to clarify, though that's beside the point. The unclever one is you, because clearly miniature dragons can't fly. Their wings are too weak, having been bred specifically to be pets. I shall probably also have to explain to you that this is why they can't breathe fire either, because I bet you didn't pick up on that. Now, if you will let me return to the story, you will see Dragon enjoying his mango in spite of himself, Piplia enjoying Dragon, and Chico keeping his own thoughts to himself, like any self-respecting chinchilla would. But if you were a clever observer and knew anything about chinchillas, you would see from the way he is wriggling his nose that he is quite pleased with himself and unworried as to the future. Since you have proven that you are not a clever observer, though, and know nothing about chinchillas beyond what I have tried over and over to tell you, I will kindly point out to you the way Chico is wriggling his nose. This means, in case you couldn't tell, that he is quite pleased with himself and unworried as to the future. That's the end of part 1, and you'll find out in part 2 what Chico's master plan is and how he's going to save the world. But yep, so stay tuned for part 2 of this story. Oh yeah, we never named it. I'm going to name it The Unsung Hero, part 1. So, see you next week to hear part 2 of The Unsung Hero. And until then, thank you for watching, and goodbye until more interesting things happen.